Hello, thank you for joining us. I'm Mary Carley.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Volunteer Spotlight. I am your host, Evan Starnes. I really hope everybody is enjoying the last bits and pieces of summer as it finally draws to a close. It was a really ridiculously hot and lengthy one, but nevertheless, it was a good one. We had a really successful Audio Trekkers hike. We had like a little over 85 registered attendees there, which is honestly the best since we've been doing it's the best we've ever had. So that was fantastic. We had, as I'm recording this, last weekend, we were at the Shine Music Fest, and that was also a blast. I got to go around and interview people, and we had a live recording of the Blind Chick podcast, which you can get on all of your favorite podcast platforms. We are also putting our podcast on YouTube as well. So if you're an avid YouTube watcher and you're subscribed to the Aftersight YouTube channel, you'll be able to get some of your favorite AI or Aftersight originals and additions on YouTube as well. Before we get into today's guest, there is one quick little announcement I did want to make. You might have noticed that there wasn't a volunteer spotlight last month. Unfortunately, the volunteer of the month last month, she just had a lot going on. And so we ended up having to, we're going to have that later this month and kind of just release it as a mini special just to, commemorate her. But last month's volunteer of the month was Sophia Niemeyer, and she reads the Pikes Peak Career. But this month, we have a very long time Aftersight volunteer that has been reading the Colorado Springs Gazette for many a year and is a fantastic volunteer, and her name is Mary Carley. Mary Carley, welcome. Well, Mary, welcome to the Volunteer Spotlight. How's today treating you?
Great. Thank you, Evan.
Absolutely. Now, you've been with Aftersight for how many years now? Like a little over 20, right?
Yeah, 23 years.
Oh, my goodness.
It? And it was amazing. I got a beautiful plaque from Aftersight honoring me for my 23 years of volunteering. Absolutely.
Yeah, Jennifer has been, oh my gosh, I can't shout her out enough. I mean, she's just been on top of just handing out those plaques. Some of those have been long overdue, so glad you got that. But I always like to start off an episode with a few fun kind of getting to know you questions that are typically quite random. So, what actually, Mary, is your favorite form of audio to listen to? Do you like audiobooks, podcasts, or something else?
Well, you're probably not going to like this answer, Evan, but I'm glad that I'm not sight impaired, because audio is very difficult for me to listen to. If I'm listening to an audiobook, I find my mind wanders. I really need to look at print.
I see.
So I don't have a favorite form of audio.
Hey, that's a first for the show, but may I say that's a little ironic, just because you record audio for our listeners. That's right. I don't know. To me, that's ironic, but
right
on, man.
I get to look at what I'm reading.
That is true. That is very, very true. Also, being that it's a great time to be outside. It's summer, almost going to be fall here. What's your favorite outdoor activity to do around this time?
I'm not sure it's my favorite, but it's what I have to do, is gardening and yard work. So my time outside is spent doing those tasks. I do enjoy them, but I would much rather be out going for a pretty walk.
Yeah. Well, and I remember you said in a video you sent a few years ago when you'd reached your 20 years with us that you enjoy like taking pictures of, different landscapes and stuff with your phone and just kind of, photographing that and kind of preserving those memories. It's, I don't know, but for me, that's a very fun and kind of therapeutic thing to do. But
yes, and I do that. Anytime some of my flowers are blooming or my bushes, I'll take pictures of those, or a picture of a hummingbird that I spy.
of course, those are, oh my gosh, hummingbirds are really hard to find nowadays. It's unfortunate. Well, let's go ahead and jump right into the meat and potatoes of this episode. So yes, you've been of course, you've been a volunteer for 23 years, but before volunteering at Aftersight, was Aftersight the first organization you volunteered for, or kind of like, how did you really get started volunteering in your community, like, in the first place?
Sure. My husband and I moved to Colorado Springs in 2001. And I immediately started looking both for a job and also volunteer opportunities. And in the local paper, I saw an ad that Pat Bradbury had placed looking for volunteers for what at that time was called the Radio Reading Service of the Rockies. And it was very special because then I got to go for an interview at the Colorado Springs School for the Deaf and Blind, because at that time they had a recording studio there. So I passed my test, and on a weekday I started recording the Colorado Springs Gazette. It was a live recording, and it was so much fun being at the broadcast studio because besides enjoying reading the paper, you had a chance to interact with the other volunteers who were there, who had either recorded a session before you or who were coming up. So that made it very special.
Absolutely. I hear that a lot from other volunteers, especially back when we had, because we used to have live shows, it was just kind of a common thing. And those, I imagine, were a lot more, high stress because what you say is going out onto the broadcast. I know there was like a button that you could press and hold if you needed to like clear your throat or whatever. But how did you feel about the live recordings as opposed to the kind of more like what you're doing now where it's pre-recorded? Like, did you prefer one over the other?
Sure. What you say is absolutely correct. I don't recall that we had a button to pause the.
Oh,
live.
No.
So yes, it was stressful, more stressful, because you felt you couldn't make a mistake because you couldn't go back and correct it. So what I did is I would, before my recording time, I would look at the newspaper and scan through the articles that I was going to be reading and make sure that I knew how to pronounce words, especially names of people, locations, street names, that kind of thing that I might not have been familiar with just having moved to Colorado. So the recording we do now digitally, that is nice because you can read an article, then you can pause the recording and stop and find the next article in the middle. If you want to take a break, you can stop. So yes, that's definitely it's not stressful at all, actually.
That's awesome to hear. I imagine times were different back then for anybody too. Besides that, like you had to also just make it to the show on time. Like you had to make it. If you were late for recording, there was no show. That's it. Yeah, absolutely. Well, so actually, for those who don't know, Aftersight, formerly AINC, formerly RRSR, did used to be primarily in Colorado Springs. We had the recording studio at the CSDB, and that was pretty much where we were. Like, that's where to my knowledge, most of our operations took place. And then eventually we moved here to Boulder, where we were in kind of an old building. I forget what it was by. It was like, I think it was on like 30th Street or whatever, before we moved to where we are now. But yeah, when we moved to Boulder, how was that? How did that affect your volunteering?
Well, one thing that was kind of sad was that people from Boulder used to come down to the studio in Colorado Springs periodically, and they might have refreshments for us or just come down to chit chat for a little while. So it was such an honor to know and interact with the service's founder, David Dawson, who, as you know, was blind, and establish a friendship with him. He recognized my voice. Kat would also come down to the studio. So it was so much fun to interact with the people in real life.
Absolutely. Well, when it comes to volunteering nowadays, you are honestly one of the very, very, very few longtime volunteers that I've interviewed that has actually just held on to their publication like since day one. So that is honestly something that I feel like should be, recognized. But
if you don't mind, I should interject. That's actually not true.
Oh, it isn't.
I wish I could have. But that isn't the way it worked out.
Oh, really?
Yes,
okay.
I did start by reading and recording the Colorado Springs Gazette. But when that studio closed, I lost that opportunity, and I read from home on a special telephone device, a more local neighborhood paper. There were two editions, the Cheyenne and Woodman editions. And I did that recording for 17 years. Now those papers, first of all, they didn't have, because it was such a localized area, they did not have a lot of listeners. And they also went out of publication. So in 2021, I was again asked to read the Gazette, and I had the chance to choose a day of the week, and I chose Sunday morning.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, thanks for interjecting too, because I started here in 2021, so that was kind of my knowledge that you'd always been on that. But my goodness, too, you got to mess around with the telephone reader that we used to have too. That was another thing that we've since, thank goodness, deprecated. Oh man, the quality on that was compared to what we've got now, quite abysmal. Now, speaking of quality, can you describe? This is one of my personal favorite sections of the show. But can you describe to our listeners kind of what your recording setup is like? I know you got a blue snowball mic, so yeah, where do you record and what do you use?
So I have a study downstairs in my house where I have a desktop computer. And that's what I use. I plug in my microphone, my blue snowball, and I open up the Audacity program on my computer, and I'm good to go. I start recording. Nice
and simple, right? Gotta love those blue snowballs too. They're like, honestly, for the price that they charge for those mics, I mean, you could do anything with them. I mean, I've seen YouTubers with millions of subscribers that their mic is a blue snowball. So yeah, that's fantastic. Being such a longtime volunteer, what is honestly just in general, what has been your absolute like favorite part of volunteering, and what keeps you coming back to the microphone every Sunday to record?
It's the same as why I started. I wanted to have a volunteer role that served others, that made a worthwhile contribution to meeting people's needs. So that is still what motivates me. It's wonderful to know that the Gazette has a large readership. So I know when I'm recording that a lot of people are benefiting from listening to that newspaper being read aloud.
Absolutely. Well, now we've come to the time where you can ask me any questions or give me any feedback about either myself, Evan Starnes, or Aftersight as an organization. But yeah, do you have any questions or feedback just for us as an organization?
Sure, I'll start with the feedback, and then I do have a question.
Of course.
What impresses me about Aftersight in terms of being a volunteer is that my role is really appreciated. We used to have a volunteer appreciation brunch in Boulder every year. Now things are done virtually. And I mentioned earlier the plaque I received. So every year, volunteers are recognized for their service. And it's just great to know that your efforts are recognized and appreciated.
That's wonderful to hear. I'm not going to lie, I did want to know that a little bit just because, like, that's something we've been trying to work on, is recognizing the, like, literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours, not even just recording, but preparing your content and cold reading beforehand. But are there any other ways that you would feel that you would like to be recognized? Perhaps?
No, there's one other thing I'd like to comment on. The other thing I appreciate is Jennifer and other members of the staff are so responsive to emails. If there's any difficulty with the the site being down, and you send an email, or if you have a question, Jennifer and others respond very, very promptly. And I definitely appreciate that.
Thank you. We really do our best to keep on top of that stuff, for sure. And
the question I have is, I completed the program enhancement feedback survey, and I was curious if you knew when that research and analysis will be completed with the results known, because I know the desire is to standardize and enhance the program length, the reading order for newspaper sections, etc.
Yes. So honestly, that whole research thing is ongoing right now. Like, it's happening. We're really just going publication by publication, and really just trying to take it one at a time, just so we're not putting too big of a load on us as a team. And really, because our main goal is, yes, to standardize everything. We want to have, just a set. We want to know basically what people are reading and how they're reading it. Like, because in doing these surveys, we have found some things out, like that people are skipping content for personal reasons, and it kind of goes against our mission. And frankly, as I'll just say this right now, like, as a blind person, as a listener of Aftersight, like, I see this as an accommodation, and I think, it's not up to the volunteer to really to pick and to cherry pick what our listeners hear. Now, duration is another thing too that we are keeping in mind, because as of now, our shows, about 90% of our shows that aren't like Aftersight originals are very much tied to the broadcast schedule. So you can either be 25 or 55 minute shows, But we also have realized that some papers really have a lot in them, and that, by restricting the reading of that publication to a duration, people might be missing out on a lot of a lot of beneficial content. So we're kind of trying to figure out, we're beta testing it first. So with one show right now, I believe that is Boulder Weekly, we're actually going to try and experiment with just reading it front to back with no duration requirement. And then we're considering, for the full length front to back shows, making them podcast only. So they wouldn't be airing at all on our live broadcast. And honestly, it does make sense, just because 98% of our listeners listen to everything on demand, whether it be on our phone system or on podcast platforms or our website. And so we do want to make sure too that this doesn't impact the listeners still listening on broadcast as well. But so that's why we're kind of doing this as a beta test. So long answer short, I think we're going to be through most of all this stuff probably by the end of the year. And, some shows might be front to back. It really ultimately depends on the publication and the volunteer, of course, too. And how our listeners to choose to listen to that show. But I do hope that answered your question too.
Sure. So I was curious, with switching, if the Gazette, for example, would switch to a podcast format, could the length of the recording then be variable depending on the content in the paper that day?
Absolutely. That's kind of the one of the big pluses to switching this to, if we were to switch this to a podcast only show. Let's say there was a slow day and, oh no, you just read through the whole thing and there's no more content to read, rather than having to I don't know, flub something to try and fill the rest of that 55-minute slot. Just say all right, that's all the content we've had. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you for joining us. And then just, end the program. Or, goodness gracious, the in your case, the Gazette is just full of stuff. You'll have time to read it and you won't have to worry about, okay, how long is my recording? Am I at 55 minutes yet? Do I need to cut this short? It just takes all of that out of the equation. So I get the impression you like this. It sounds like you're digging these changes.
I like the idea of the variability, because one of the principles of recording is to only record the local news, not the national news, because there are other publications that listeners can listen to that focus on national news.
Mm-hmm.
So some days, the Colorado Springs Gazette on the front page focuses on national news. So then there isn't that much local news to read. Other times, in multiple sections of the paper, whether it's that front section, the sports section, the life section with travel, it focuses totally on things in Colorado Springs or in Colorado in general. So there's tons of stuff to read, and it would be nice to be able to go beyond that set 55-minute time period.
That's awesome. Okay, well, it sounds like you're on board with that. Well, hey, who knows? That might just be what we do then, is just make that a podcast only show with variable durations. And that's also just right now, that is actually some very, very insightful feedback to hear. So I'm going to honestly pass that on to my team, because, it's information we want to hear from volunteers and listeners alike. Now, before we do wrap up this episode of the Volunteer Spotlight, I I always like to ask, do you have any words of advice or any words of encouragement that you would offer to somebody that is interested in becoming a volunteer, or even somebody that's been volunteering for, a while now?
For someone interested in volunteering, I think it's really anyone who has the time and interest can do it. They need to obviously have a good speaking voice, but that's really, the main requirement. And I think for those who have been volunteering for a long time, I think it's important to speak with enthusiasm, because you want to arouse your listeners' interest in the program that you're recording.
100%. Absolutely. Well, Mary, I'd like to thank you so much for joining me under the volunteer spotlight today. It's as always, it's been a pleasure.
You're welcome, Evan.
Indeed. Well, thank you all so much for listening to another episode of the Volunteer Spotlight. Be sure to stay tuned as well for that special episode with Sophia Niemeyer that will be dropping later on this month. And stay tuned for more events coming soon from Aftersight. With that being said, I am your host, Evan Starnes, and I will see you all in a couple of weeks.